Hello and welcome to our 1-3 lesson on comparing and ordering real numbers. So if you have me for class, make sure you are on the second page of our note packet. And we're going to start by talking about our perfect squares. So just a reminder that a perfect square number is a number that when it has factors that you can multiply them by themselves to get them. So 1 times 1 or 1 squared is 1. So that makes 1 a perfect square. 2 times 2 or 2 squared is 4. So 4 is a perfect square. 3 squared is 9. So what we want to point out here is that the perfect square numbers are these 1, 4, 9, 16, 25, 36. These are the perfect square numbers. The roots here, the 5, that's not a perfect square. That would be the square root of 25. But we're going to need this list and possibly more to be able to estimate numbers, the square roots of numbers that are not on this list, basically. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with example 1 here, and it says estimate the square root of 63. So I'm going to try and keep my perfect squares list on screen while I have my example 1 on screen. Okay, so estimate the square root of 63. If you look in our perfect squares list here, we don't have a 63. We have a 64, and then the next closest is a 49. So what we do to estimate this number without a calculator is we list the two perfect squares around it. So between the perfect squares around it are going to be 49 and 64. Okay, and so what I like to do is I like to start with those perfect squares, and then I go, okay, I work backwards. So the square root of 49 is 7. And the square root of 64 is 8. I know that because 7 times 7 is 49, 8 times 8 is 64. And so I can use that information now to estimate to a decimal number where 63, the square root of 63, is going to be. Okay, so 63, is that closer to 49 or 64? Well, it's much closer to 64. So I'm going to put my 63 really close to 64 here. And in the middle here of 49 and 64, I'm going to put a middle line, okay? Now, I know in the middle of 7 and 8 exactly would be 7.5, right? So since 63 is super close to 64, that means the square root of 63 should be super close to 8, but not going over 8. So if I work backwards, I would estimate the square root of 63 is probably about 7.9. So square root of 63, we're going to say, is about equal to, that's the symbol for about equal to, 7.9. That's how we can get close to these numbers without actually using a calculator. Now, just note that this does go on forever and ever and ever. This is going to turn out to be an irrational number, but if we can get a good estimate to the nearest tenth or around that, that's going to help us compare and order numbers later. Okay, so the next one is a you try it. So I'm going to leave that one for you. And for the sake of the video, I'm going to only do example 2. If we have time, I will do example 3 as well. So moving on down the line here. Example 2 now asks us to compare two numbers, okay? It says compare the square root of 32 and 5.51326 ... indicating that that number is going to keep going, and then plot each number in its approximate location on a number line. Okay, in order to do this, we can plot this one, even though it's irrational, pretty easily on a number line. We can estimate where that's going to go. We know that the nearest two whole numbers are 5, and greater than that is going to be 6. So we know this is going to land about in the middle of 5 and 6 because we're at 5.51. Okay, that one's pretty easy. What we don't know is the square root of 32. which without a calculator, we just learned how to estimate that. So here's what we're going to do. We use our perfect squares list, okay? And hopefully, eventually you'll have this list memorized. But if you take a look, our number 32, the two closest perfect squares are going to be 25 and 36. So we'll start with listing those out like we did before. Okay, so 25 and 36 are our two closest square roots. Okay, so let's work backwards. The square root of 25 is going to give us 5, and the square root of 36 will give us 6. Okay? And now we got to think about this. Is 32 closer to 25 or closer to 36? And you can count in your head or on your fingers if you want to, but if you count the numbers 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, you'll know that it is 7 units away from 25. But 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, it's only 4 units away from 36. So here's our middle line, right? It's going to land closer to 36, but not super close to 36 like our last example. It's going to land around here, okay? So it's not going to be right next to that 36. We still have 35, 34, 33 there. So we're going to work backwards again, right? And we know the exact middle would have been 5.5, but it's got to be higher than 5.5 and lower than 6. But we know it's not super close to 6, and it's not super close to 5.5. So maybe we estimate that it's 5.7 or 5.8. Somewhere in there would be a good estimate. Remember, we're just estimating here. We're not being exact, and then we're going to put it on the number line. So 5.8 is what we're going to use to put on our number line instead of trying to do the square root of 32. So now we do our number line. Both of our numbers land between 5 and 6. So we're going to make a little number line with numbers near there, 6, 7, to make sure that we've got all of the integers that we need. And we know that we're going to plot our numbers. So right in the middle here, right, would be 5.5. And this is a 5.51. So I'm going to plot that guy almost right on top of that. Okay. And I'm going to label it. And I'm running out of space, but I can do an arrow and I can say this is my 5.51. 3, 2, 6 right here. And now I'm going to plot my square root of 32, which I know is 5.8. So that's going to be higher than this, but lower than 6. So I'm going to plot that right here. And I'm going to do my arrow again since I ran out of space. And I'm going to label it not 5.8. I'm going to label it the square root of 32. And that's how I compare and plot these numbers on number lines. Okay, for the sake of length, I am going to run through this last example rather quickly. And then if you have questions, you can make sure that you see me or email me and I'll get back to you and I can help you out. So compare and order the numbers, right? We don't have to make a number line, but we do have to put these numbers in order. Now, the ones that we've got are 3.8, 3.5 are repeating, pi, 3.5, and a square root of 15. Well, something that you should have memorized by now in your mathematical career is that pi, the estimate, they usually round that guy to about 3.14, even though it's an irrational number. If you don't know that, please memorize that. And 3.5, a half is another thing that we should get memorized. That is about that is 0.5 as a decimal. So 3.5 is going to be 3.5. So now I have all the first 4 all written in decimal format. And the only one I really need to work on is the square root of 15 before I can put them in order. So we're going to do this again. If you look at your perfect squares list, 15 falls between 9 and 16. So that's where we're going to start. We're going to start with, let's make sure I'm on screen here, my perfect square of 9 and my perfect square of 16. Working backwards, square root of 9 is 3. square root of 16 is 4. We know directly in the middle would be 3.5. And we're going to write this middle line here for the middle of 9 and 16. Well, where does 15 fall? Does it fall closer to 9 or 16? And that's an easy one. This falls really close to 16. It's the next closest integer. So 15 is going to be right there. It is going to be super close to 16, which means it's going to be super close to 4. So we're going to estimate that at about 3.9 for this one. And so I'm going to write that in. Now it says to order them. So now we need to put them from least to greatest. So my least decimal is actually the 3.14. But when I list it, I'm going to list it as pi as my first number. Then, and excuse me, you can cross these out as you go so you don't get confused. Next in line is going to be what? Is it going to be 3.5 repeating or just 3.5? Well, 3.5, remember the next digit on that would really be a 0. The next digit on this would be a 5, making this one less. So my next one would be 3.5, and then 3.5 repeating. And now I'm left with 3.8 or the square root of 15. Well, we found out the square root of 15 is about 3.9. So 3.8 would be next, and the square root of 15 would be our last number. Okay, that is the lesson for today. The homework, if you have me for math class, is actually a worksheet. So you'll need to get that from me. So our homework is going to be approximate and plot square roots worksheet. And you can see me for that, or you can get it in the bins on the side counter if you have me for class. If you don't, you can look something on like that online for Google and Google approximate and plot square roots, and they will give you some practice on that. Okay, hopefully that helps you out. I hope you have a great day, and I will see you for the next lesson.